Blimey. This is one out of a jam jar you got here.
Warning. The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host and curator, sometimes lover, if you so choose. I'm not picky. And then in the studio, or in the House of Mystery, I should say, with me is the demon bisexual butler, David. Hello.
Everyone knows that I'm not picky.
That's true.
I don't even care if you have like a form. You could be a gelatinous mess. I don't care.
Did you say a forearm or a form?
Form.
Oh, I think it's like forearm.
Well, I mean, if they don't have a forearm, God only knows.
You're into amputees? Is that your fetish?
Hey, everyone needs love.
That's true. I like how you cover your fetish, your perverse fetishes, with like humanitarian
yes.
ideas. Like, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with him being an accepting individual, nor a humanitarian. It's the simple fact that he is a pervert. That's the truth of the matter, people. Don't let him fool you. All right, welcome everyone. If you're new to the show, we are a John Constantine eccentric podcast. We talk mostly about John, but we do get into his friends. And I use that word loosely, some air quotes here. We get into the areas of the darker side of DC, whether it be Swamp Thing, the Dead Man, the Phantom Stranger. My mind went blank for a second.
Went blank like mine. Oh,
the Phantom Stranger. The list goes on and on. Justice League Dark in general. If they reside within the darker side of DC when it comes to the world of magic, we're probably going to get into it at some point. But for the most part, I'd say a good 80 to 85% of our show is centered around John Constantine. And that's why today, Dave, we're going to be getting into Jamie Delano's Hellblazer run. This will be our second discussion.
God, I'm so excited, dude. By far, the Hellblazer, the very first couple issues of Hellblazer is what influenced me as a comic book reader.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man. And if people missed our first discussion on Hellblazer issue 1, just scroll through your feed about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months, and you should see the first discussion pop right up. Listen to that one first. We go over all the finer details, the context behind the writing of the first issue, the time frame, whether or not it holds up to this day, still, 20 plus years later, 30 plus years later. And now we're going to continue our discussion into issue 2 and how we're doing this. We're doing this discussion. We're taking our time with the discussion. We're not trying to rush through it. We will get to every issue eventually. Maybe in 13 years, we'll probably finally cover all 300 issues. But we're also doing this per volume. So we're not going based on the original release structure so far, because it just happens to be that way. We are going in order, but we're going based on the volume that was released several years back titled Original Sins.
Yes.
Which I believe makes up Hellblazer issues 1 through 9 and Constantine's first introduction into DC canon, Swamp Thing number 76 and 77. So when I say we're not going to go in the exact order they came out, that's what I mean. We're going to go based on how they were released in the volumes.
Yes.
All right. So we are taking our time. So we may never get to issue 300, but, at least by doing this, it gives us John Constantine things to talk about because, as we know, we're a little John Constantine light over the last 2 years.
At least for now.
It's very strange because even when Hellblazer came to an end back, 2013, I want to say the Vertigo title officially ended, you had the New 52 era that started in 2011. And for the most part, all throughout the 2010s, you had some revolving Constantine story being published with maybe a few breaks here and there separated by maybe 6 months. But you had something. But since Cy Spurrier's run that ended in 2020, which was only, 12 issues roughly?
12, yeah.
We've got nothing. And I don't think since 1988, David, we've ever had a 2-year gap where we as fans have not been given something when it comes to an ongoing John Constantine story.
Well, the weird part, especially the last 2 years, Constantine has been used in a lot of major storylines and story plots, but when it comes to having his own title, not really.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, have we ever, I don't think we've ever had, I know for a fact we've never had 2 years without something.
Ever. I mean, he's at least, at the only consolation, I guess what I'm saying is like the only consolation that we have with Constantine is like if there's a major DC storyline that's going on, he plays a role in it.
Yeah, and that's definitely the silver lining.
That's the only silver lining. But when you're looking at like a ongoing title series, especially with Cy Spurrier's run, I thought that we'd be getting an ongoing series. After issue 12, I'm like, okay, they just opened the world up for Constantine. Let's go. 2 years later, we don't have a follow-up to it.
Because DC's head is always firmly up their ass.
Seems.
It seems. No, it is. Come on. We know this to be true. So that's why we started, David, ultimately why we decided to get into the ongoing Hellblazer run from the past via the Vertigo imprint, because at least it gives us something to fall back on.
Yeah.
If we don't have anything to talk about, or we go too long without talking about John Constantine, then we can always just revert right back to these original issues, which of course we've never covered thoroughly. We've talked about them off and on throughout the run of our, last 2.5 years of doing this show.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So we're going to be getting into issue 2 in this, let me backtrack. I lost my train of thought here, but yes. So in this episode, we're going to focus exclusively on issue 2, which was originally published February 1988. I mean, that number, Dave, 1988.
It makes you feel so old.
It does. It makes me feel really old. And also it makes me think that this Hellblazer title is outdated, but it really surprisingly still holds up.
It does.
And not just the writing style, but the art, the message, the social commentary, all of it still holds up. And that's a rarity in comics. Not a lot of comic books from the 80s, Dave, from the early 2000s, from New 52. I'm going to bring it even closer to home.
Bring it closer.
They just don't hold up. They're flimsy narratives, immature storylines, and yet here we have from 1988 a title that still has legs and still is relevant. That's
why I tell people is like the strength of when people ask me like, oh, I want to get into comics and what should I start reading? I automatically tell them you can go back to the 80s and read things like Hellblazer. You can read Swamp Thing, Doom Patrol, anything for the Vertigo line. Go read it, because automatically all their stories are never outdated. It's because back then, especially in Vertigo, they tackled subjects that are like they last the test of time, because they deal with more subject matters that are more prevalent to the human nature.
Yeah.
What it means to be human.
The human condition, yeah.
And that's what makes a character like Constantine stick with their fans, because we all relate to him. And
that's a fair assessment.
If you think about it, it's the reason why we look at characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and everyone constantly says, oh, those are the icons of DC. But if you think about it, for us Vertigo fans, we relate more to a character like John Constantine than we ever could to a character like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Why? Because Constantine's more realistic.
I identify with Wonder Woman.
And I think all of us would like to identify with Wonder Woman at one point. But that's the thing. We want to identify with those characters, right? But realistically, we identify more with Constantine because he deals with what it means to be actually normal or human.
He's a human character.
He's
a very human character. And even though we delve into the world of magic and the occult, and the larger than life aspects, or I should say the larger than life backdrop,
the true moral questions is what
are human questions.
And that's what Constantine deals with.
Yep.
You know, everyone makes fun of the joke that, well, Batman's human. Yeah, but he's a billionaire who basically is dealing with the trauma of the death of his parents.
Oh!
Okay. Look at Constantine.
So
Constantine deals with that every single storyline.
He has to deal with people he's responsible for killing, and then finding a way to justify it.
And that's a good point. But like at the end of the day, he takes responsibility for it.
Yeah.
Like that's why I loved about when they first established Constantine, you could almost say Constantine's not a hero.
No.
But he's a guy that basically realizes
he's out there trying to do good, though.
He's trying to do good,
yeah.
And he does it even though it might cost something, and he's willing to carry that burden.
Okay, and that's a big talking point we're going to get into a little bit later, because I want something we've never gone into really is John Constantine's ethics.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that because there's definitely some ethical issues in this storyline, specifically dealing with Lester.
Oh
and
my God,
people who've read these issues are very familiar with what happened.
Yes.
And we've seen it also, I believe they had Lester and the storyline, well, a version of the storyline in the original 2013 Constantine TV show on NBC.
They did.
As well.
I give them props for that too, because the story of Lester, that is like one of those very...
It's a sad one.
It's a sad story, but the moral question and the philosophical questions that it poses is something that you will never see a character like Superman make the choice that Constantine has to make. Yep. And that's the thing.
Well,
Superman can make it work because he's a superhero. He's a cape.
Yeah, but would he be able to make this work, Dave? That's the question. Throw Superman into this scenario.
He never could.
And how would he fix this problem?
Yeah.
How would he fix it?
Couldn't.
There would be no way for him to fix it because he wants to save everyone.
He wants to save everyone.
And in a scenario like this, there is no way to save everyone. And that's the beautiful thing about the John Constantine storylines when you write them correctly. You give him a no way out. You force him as a writer to make those hard decisions, because then that adds to his character development, and it adds to what's become, from these very issues here, become part of his genetic makeup, which is the guilt, the remorse he lives with. So yeah, David, the ideological intent still holds up. The narrative style still holds up. The human element of these issues still holds up. And that's a rarity in any form of media, not just comic books. So to see that these storylines, look, we just went into about 5 minutes on ethics, and we haven't even gotten to the real topic yet.
Exactly.
And all from one issue, Dave, from 1988.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, David. So officially, let's get started. This issue here, issue number 2, released in 1988, it does conclude the first official Hellblazer storyline.
Yes.
In it, John tackles the hunger spirit alongside Papa Midnight, and in doing so is forced to contend and face his inner demons. Now, Delano is really doing some expert level writing here, because in just 2 issues, roughly 60 to 65 pages, he managed to really build out a foundation that not only formally establishes John Constantine as a viable character, meaning his characterization and internal conflict, a person riddled with guilt, haunted by the demons of his past, and delves into various avenues of remorse. All in 2 issues, we get more than just a snapshot. There are issues that come out today in comic books that can't do the amount of story and character development that Delano did in 2 issues, and they can't do it in 10 issues.
Exactly.
They're unable to do it, and I understand that's also possibly the intent of their writing. Many comic books are very plot driven because it's written for a specific mindset. There isn't a lot of room for that slow, methodical character development at times. But that's the beautiful thing about this character. It's designed to be that type of story. So you can get into these these little elements that really make up a character. And the best part about this is it's not John Constantine himself saying, "Oh, darn me, I'm going to be riddled with guilt now," like some writers do with John Constantine, where they have him vocalize his guilt and vocalize his remorse, which takes away from the impact, in my opinion. It's silly when you're trying to write a story to verbalize what someone's going through when the subtext and the narrative techniques can do the job for you. And that's exactly what Delano does in these opening 2 issues here.
Well, the amazing thing what Jamie Delano was able to do was, you have to remember, Constantine was created to be a callback to that pulpy detective
film noir,
right? And he was established very well by Alan Moore and everyone in Swamp Thing. That was the bare bones of his creation. Was he is a detective that basically deals with the supernatural, and everywhere he goes, the tragedy follows. Jamie Delano was able to actually add to that, take those elements and just add depth to it. Show us that, Constantine is a bastard, but he's a bastard with a heart. He understands that he has to do this, and he feels remorse for the stuff that he is forced to choose. And just like we said, Constantine doesn't go around and start talking speeches. We see his guilt through his actions, whether it's, especially in this one where he drinks himself into unconsciousness. That is insane.
Yeah.
Because he cannot live with the choice he just made. And to the point where he just basically says, I'm going to knock myself out. We're going to get through the day. Self-medicate, right? And just try to bury his head in the sand as best as he can till what happens ends, and then he can move on.
Yeah.
And then that is it gave such a depth to the character that more than just, I'm a brilliant detective and I'm going to solve the mystery.
Yeah. And there's more to it than just simply the brooding aspects as well, because you also understand his worldview, his personal ideology, which I would say encompasses a variety of things that stem from a type of jaded cynicism.
Absolutely.
All of which says a lot about his aspirations, morality. There is a morality, by the way. He's not amoral like some readers and writers believe. And let me just throw the New 52 in there, because that was one of my biggest problems with Constantine's very first comic book run for the New 52 when he was brought into the main DC continuity. It was the fact that they almost made him like he enjoyed the bad things that he did. Yeah. If you remember, we reviewed volume 1 of the New 52 John Constantine, and that was one of our biggest problems. It felt like the writer was insinuating that he didn't have guilt or remorse and that he just shrugged and said, fuck it, this is what I do because this is who I am.
He gave up. And Constantine's a type of character that absolutely giving up is never a option.
Yeah.
Constantine will do whatever it takes to at least win the day. Just win the day and get through it. And no matter what the cost. But he embraces that guilt. That's why one of my favorite scenes in this thing is the bedroom scene with the ghosts, where he talks about guilt. That is an amazing piece of how you write a character.
That's how you do it.
That deals with guilt.
Because I also like the idea that they leave it up to interpretation.
Yes.
Was it really ghosts?
Was it really ghosts?
Or was it just him?
His brain.
Yeah.
Was it actually him just manifesting?
Remembering all the lives that he feels responsible for because of what he's about to do to Lester.
And that's the thing about that. I really liked what Delano did with the concept of magic in the DC universe when it came to Hellblazer. It's not, there's always that ambiguity. Is it real or is it not? Is what's happening really happening, or is it a manifestation of something else? Especially when you're dealing with the spirits that we have to deal with in the first 2 issues, the spirit of gluttony. Is it really a god, or is it something else? They don't really come out and say this is the god of
Shakari.
Yeah, the god of Shakari.
No, wasn't it?
No, it's gonna, yeah, exactly. But like, they don't come out and say that. They leave it very ambiguous. That makes the magic feel very supernatural. You know, it doesn't. It's not something like Superman or Batman where we can actually look at it and say, okay, he's flying because he's a superhero, and we could see that. But like when it comes to magic in Hellblazer, they show it that if you try to actually give this problem to the Capes, meaning Superman, his powers aren't going to do jack against this. Because what is super strength going to do against a god that literally apparently can take over your body at a whim?
Right. Exactly.
That's going to do nothing. And,
yeah.
And that's what I liked about like Hellblazer too when I was first reading it, because during that time in the 80s, everything was hokey and, you know, everything was treated superficially. Like powers were just treated, oh, he could jump, he can fly, you know, leap tall buildings at a single bound. Cool. And that's what comics are based on, the outlandish. But when Hellblazer and Vertigo came out, then they started establishing, hey, there's more to actually having superpowers. And then that's where magic comes in DC. And that's why one of the greatest mysteries in DC Comics is how do you take what Vertigo established with their magic realm and mash it together with their main continuity? And they tried to do it in the New 52. And we saw everyone, you can look at the history of it and see that basically that did not work well.
It didn't.
Because
for a lot of reasons, it didn't work very well.
Because it loses when you do that, the magic element kind of loses its luster.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you ruin the mystery of it?
Yeah.
Mystery is the magic. How does it work? We don't, and that's the thing. When you compare these first two issues to say like New 52, do you realize they never really explained how Constantine's doing the magic or how Papa Midnight's doing the magic? They just show it.
It just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
But if you look at like writers, especially nowadays, New 52, I don't think Spurrier did a really good job, because I thought he did like a really cool throwback to that type of storytelling where you don't explain the magic. You just let the magic be. It just happens. You don't have to explain it. John doesn't have to pull out a freaking wand.
Well, that's the contrast there between New 52 and the Vertigo run here, especially with these first two issues specifically. It feels there's a flimsiness to the New 52. There's not a lot of reasons behind why. It's just it is.
It is.
Whereas with just these opening two issues, you can immediately see that it's true. It's truly written like a literary piece. There are reasons behind the why. Everything that happens, there's a justification for it, narratively speaking. And just to bring it back to the morality aspect for a moment here, that's something specifically that we got to see in this issue, that the regular continuity John Constantine titles never really got right. As I was saying, you had this idea many times that he was just a bad guy. If you didn't know Vertigo John Constantine and you were just reading Constantine from the New 52 and onward, you would think this guy's a real piece of shit and a bad guy. Like, why do people read this guy's stories? Why do we care about him? But we see here that he does have a type of morality. He's not amoral, like what a lot of people say. Even blogs, when they're reviewing Constantine storylines, they'll say, oh, he's amoral or he has a skewed moral compass. I don't even think he has a skewed moral compass. There is a morality there. He has a reason for everything, though there are moments of selfishness throughout the lifetime of his stories. Mostly, I'd say he does things for some justified greater good.
Yeah.
The morality and or ethics of John Constantine does shift from time to time since 1988. But I'd say for the most part, he's written as a person that subscribes to a type of consequentialism, which, just to give a little bit of a context to what that is, that's a type of ethics that tells us that what makes actions right or wrong are the consequences of the action and not any feature of the action itself. basically we should take the action that maximizes the good consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at just these first two issues, I'd say that Constantine's behavior is proof that he does, in fact, lean into a type of ethics that would be called consequentialism.
Oh, yeah.
You know, for example, Constantine knew that Lester would not make it out alive, but the only way to defeat Minimoth, is that how you say his name? Minmoth was to use him as bait, because in doing so, they'd stop the rampant, demonic, greed-induced killings that was taking over the city.
Yeah.
He chose to sacrifice Lester in order to maximize the greatest goodness.
Yeah.
Another good comparison, just to exemplify my point here, is the decision that the United States made during World War II to drop the nuke on Japan.
Yes.
That's an atrocity, but there's a form of consequentialism there. If the consequences means that it's going to end the war and we're going to save millions and millions of lives, then the people who died and the potential fallout is justified. And that's pretty much where John Constantine resides when it comes to his morality. There is no skewed moral compass. It's a type of morality. It's consequentialism, maybe even utilitarianism, which is also a form of consequentialism.
I think also the way that it could be understandable for a lot of people out there, if you want to actually think of it just outside of that and try to understand that, is one of the simplest and easiest philosophical statements I've ever read. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
There you go.
That is consequentialism.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You are doing this because the majority of good outweighs the bad.
Yeah. You value, your value judgments are made on the consequence.
Yes.
Now, if John Constantine decided to sacrifice Lester and the demon wasn't defeated, now suddenly you're like, oh fuck, I did the wrong thing.
And that's the thing. That's how I always saw in New 52 how they write John. Is like, well, he makes the choices, but all the choices that he always makes are bad.
And they're all extremely selfish.
And that's not how it goes.
Yeah.
You know, like,
not to say that Constantine isn't selfish, because there definitely are storylines that exemplify his selfishness. But when it comes to the larger decisions that he makes, he's usually guided by consequentialism. But like, he's not a selfish character per se. No.
And I always felt, and people might disagree with me, the best outside of Hellblazer, after this, the best way that Constantine was ever captured character-wise, just the basis of his character, was how they wrote Constantine in the animated movies.
Yeah.
His entire storyline is about like making those tough decisions and living with the consequences. And basically the consequences coming to haunt him. That's consequentialism in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. Like, he makes those tough decisions. He knows that basically this is going to win us out in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to pay the cost.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, we understand this, because in issue 2, that's why we know what he's about to do to Lester is not an easy task for him.
No.
Someone that's amoral wouldn't be struggling with the decision he made. That's why Delano used issue 2 to really exemplify John's struggle and highlighted his guilt in the form of ghosts, which is what you brought up.
Yes.
The image of former friends and acquaintances that had, you know, I suppose they faced a similar end
because of his decisions.
Because of decisions Constantine had made. I mean, he was struggling with this decision. It was obvious, and it's quite good how it's done. Delano doesn't just do what so many subpar writers do and have the character himself tell us how he feels. Yes, there's narration in the vein of the film noir where we can gain a general understanding of his thought process, but that's a thought process. Delano uses the narrative itself to focus those thoughts. The narration is simply the jumping off point. So they're not cheating. When they very well could have cheated with the narration. Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about film noir. You can get a lot of, you know, characterization built up because of the nature of the film noir narration, the voiceover. but not even Delano used that to cheat. There were moments that he definitely used it, and he could have, but no, he used it just simply as a jumping off point to help focus the narrative so he can then show us, not tell us what John is going through.
And you know, a perfect example of that is like, I wrote down here one of my probably the favorite line in issue 2 that I have is when Constantine, after everything's done with Lester, he wakes up and then Midnight looks at him and says, "For a man of power, you leave yourself very vulnerable." And Constantine basically says, he says a bit of dialogue, but then he ends it with, "Anyway, funerals are easier if there's a wake." That is creative use of dialogue.
Yes,
because it's not like a narrative in a film noir where I fell asleep and I woke up the next day and stuff like that. Instead, Delano decided, no, I'm going to add characterism to John to get my story across. Like, increase that cynicism in his voice when he's like going, "Yeah, this was terrible," but
Delano uses the various elements to flesh out who John Constantine is as a character from top to bottom.
Much better than just using plain narrative.
Yeah, because certainly you have the dialogue, right? You have the narration that you could point to and say also strengthened, but he didn't just rely on that. As I was saying, he also he relied on the gamut of narrative style, because even those elements, there are other elements like the secondary characters that also help build out this visual aesthetic that really sells Constantine's struggle and morality as well. Papa Midnight was used perfectly to also bring to the surface how John Constantine is feeling about his decision. Papa Midnight was a bit poking him in the ribs a bit with comments about what he's doing. And that was just yet another strategy to help the audience fully understand who this character is.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the way they use Midnight, I thought was genius, is because like Midnight represents that all-encompassing power that is above John, that judges him. And it's very like Midnight's dialogue is very much like as if John was having a talk with God himself, where Midnight is like telling him, "Hey, you got to do this. Sucks to be you, but
he's antagonistic." That was the word I was looking for. Yeah,
but it's not in any evil way.
No,
it's almost like this harsh reality.
Well, what did Papa Midnight say? His justification was simple. He's all, "This is for humanity," I believe is what he said.
This is for humanity. Or even the one thing that he says to John is grief. I think it's grief is let me see if I find it real quick. Oh, grief, Constantine, is a luxury.
Yeah.
He's that harsh reality that basically,
this is what we do. This is the world we live in. Get used to it.
Get used to it. And it's like when that happens, it's kind of like that's one of the reasons why superheroes have never fit well in the Vertigo landscape, because they have to take account of their actions and consequences. Like, if you were to throw Superman in this type of storyline, I know for a fact that pretty much 90% of all writers would just have Superman miraculously take on Min-Moth, and basically the will of Superman would overpower Min-Moth.
The will
right?
of Superman.
But it's true.
You're so right.
It's true, though. The will of Superman would banish Min-Moth. And that's how you end the thing, because Superman is this.
What about bad
good.
Superman from Superman 3? He would definitely do what needs to be done.
He'd do what's done.
And then he would try to hit on Lana instead of save people from a fire.
When he's just sitting there and basically saying, "There's a fire going on.
Let's relax a little."
Yeah, let's relax a little. Oh, God, that was horrible. But that's the reason why characters like what a lot of the Vertigo fans call capes. That's why they can't mix in this world.
Yeah.
And to this day, I'm still waiting for a writer to pull it off, where they can actually go, I could take the Vertigo type of storytelling and put it to the capes and make it work.
Well, even Justice League Dark, the newer run, they find ways to skirt around it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it's all that creative. It's simply, hey, Wonder Woman's in charge now, and this is what you guys do. So they found a way to just remove many of the capes from the situation by bringing about in an official capacity the Justice League Dark. But I liked how Justice League Dark started, the first volume. How that started, how it showed you why you need Justice League Dark. Not, hey, let's just skirt the heroes and just establish a magical group. In the very first volume, I believe the first volume was actually written by Delano. That's why the first volume was pretty fucking good.
Yes.
I could be wrong. I think it's Delano. It was one of the gentlemen writing Hellblazer at the time. Or Hellblazer in the past. Let's take a moment.
Just take a moment. Because I think you're right.
Yeah, I think because we covered it. Yeah, we're real prepared here.
It's all right.
Maybe not. It's Peter Milligan. I knew it was one of the Hellblazer writers. Peter Milligan is the one.
Yes. Yeah, it was Peter Milligan and then Michael.
And he had written on the Hellblazer Vertigo imprint as well. But that's the reason why the first volume of Justice League Dark back in 2011 was pretty fucking solid, because there was a Hellblazer writer writing it.
Yeah, you had someone who had those Vertigo ties to
and
it.
What did he do? The opening 4 pages was about removing the superhero element. He removed them because Enchantress was way too powerful and ensnared Batman, Superman, and I believe Wonder Woman. Yeah. And that's why the world of magic had to come and fill the void. It just made more sense. Now with the new era of Justice League Dark, it's just simply, hey, you guys are the official group, and that just removes us from it.
Yeah, and then basically we'll throw in these characters in here just because.
Yeah. So one thing is certain, Delano laid out a lot of ingredients as well, even things that didn't necessarily pay off in these first 2 issues. He set up the world of Hellblazer in such a way that it could almost go in any direction.
He set the
moving
table.
Forward. I mean, the cosmology is there. There's also a bit of there's allusions to the fact that Constantine's world is a deterministic world. There are mentions of fate. I want to say several times, things that you can't change. There's also an existential flair because of John Constantine's nature in itself.
Oh yeah, especially when you get to the idea of why Lester was chosen. It's a very fate type of destiny storyline, where in any other like superhero story, you would find the hero actually overcoming fate. But in the Vertigo world, fate is something you cannot overcome. You are predestined for this. So that's why when you get to really take a step back and see, you feel bad for Lester. Don't get me wrong. I felt bad for him. But when you take a step back and you realize that there's more choice.
His own greed is what got him into trouble.
His addiction.
Yeah.
His addiction was like, he was tailor-made to be the person that's supposed to contain Minmo.
He was a loser his whole life, I believe is what Constantine said. And that this was perhaps this was his fate. I want to say is what he said. Yeah.
This was because this was what he was meant to do.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that I really, when I first read it, I said, man, this is a really cool, super dark storytelling. But when you actually, years later, I always go back to the Hellblazer, and I realized just how much philosophy and morality storytelling is told in these stories that you don't see nowadays, because people don't want to actually see a story where the hero has to make that tough decision.
Some of the best stories are the ones when writers utilize notions of the philosophical. I mean, look at the current Swamp Thing title from Ram V.
Yep. But if you think about it too, now look at that in retrospect, because me and you have talked about this before. There are comic book readers out there that feel Ram V, his type of storytelling goes over their head.
He's a little abstract. I will I love it, and
But if you think
I don't
about
think it's abstract in a bad way, but I understand the argument to a degree from people who don't want to read the abstract. They want to read a straightforward comic book, because there are a lot of people that just want to do that. It's not my thing, but I feel like Ram V has a very specific type of audience.
Oh yeah, because Ram V's type of writing is what makes comic books not just a comic book, but a literary device.
There you go. Yep.
And if you want a comic book, sure, it's okay. You can read all the capes, all the,
I do.
flash and pompous and circumstance.
I read Superman.
Fine. Yeah. But like
I don't read Batman, though.
when it comes to it makes you angry. But when it comes to like that type of storytelling, when we go, hey, this is a type of storytelling that you go back and you study it.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes into basically making comic books legitimate pieces of literary work.
Yeah.
That is what we're looking at when we're seeing like Jamie Delano's run.
Absolutely, because there's even more. You hit it right on the head, because there's even more to this comic, but than just simply the obvious. Because outside of character development and cosmology, issue 2 continues to explore the insatiable hunger of Minmoth, which serves as a metaphor that explores sociological and political concerns of the times. In 1988, there was a lot of anxieties, and the Reagan administration, I should say, pertaining to the Reagan administration and what was going on, and by default, the United Kingdom, because as we know, we're pretty much dual world powers. Anything that happens in the United States pretty much is also going on in the United Kingdom. And they spent a lot of the decade revitalizing the idea of traditional values. That's what the Reagan administration was about, as well as faith in global capitalism and democracy. That's what the 80s was all about. Even the film market mirrored much of the traditional values that the Reagan administration was pushing. Yeah. We all know the concerns that capitalism breeds. And I feel like that's what Delano was trying to explore here with this greed demon, a lot of which some would say serves as a way to settle anxieties, but also distract. That's the horrible thing about capitalism, right? That consume, and keep your mind off what's happening. Like I consider myself a capitalist, so I'm not against capitalism. It's the reason why we don't live in huts right now. It's the reason why we have the things we have. But there is an argument to be made that currently, as well as in the 80s, capitalism has run amok.
Oh, especially in the 80s, because if you think about it, just film-wise, take it into concept of one of the most acclaimed movies in the 80s, which was Wall Street. What is the most famous line in that one?
Yeah.
Greed is good.
Yep.
Greed works.
It was definitely a topic of concern.
It was a topic of concern, but there was an embracing of it in the 80s
because of the Reagan administration.
Yeah. And then when you get to Delano telling that story, taking that story of how greed can overcome anything. I mean, one of the things that when I went back and I studied these issues just for its literary purpose, seeing Delano actually use the fact that something as base as greed can overcome anything. Even down to like in the very first issue, it overcome religion. Yeah. Because what was one of the victims? A priest that was devoted to God. And greed didn't care. Greed still took over him. And then what happened? The priest ended up very gruesomely like eating wood until his stomach popped of the crucifix.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was Delano basically saying, these base instincts of all of us that we have to watch out for, like the quote unquote original sins, greed, lust, envy, they are stronger than anything in the world that you can possibly consume.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you can learn a lot about a comic book or a book or a movie or a TV show, pretty much any form of media, when you understand the context of the time.
Yeah.
And all the things you're mentioning were definitely part of the anxieties of the 80s, because yes, capitalism, there's an argument to be made. This isn't a political show. This is just a show dissecting the social commentary of the comic. So please don't get angry out there, people. But we all know that there are dangers of unrestrained capitalism. It can lead to cronyism. So there's a lot of interesting thoughts and ideas going on in this issue. And it's done through the lens of a demon.
Yes.
Which is cool because this is proper social commentary. When you have problems with society, this is how you do it. You don't write shows like we get on the CW where they overtly state things. Well, I don't like racism. Well, thank you for that. That's quite the bold statement, idiot. Like,
and that's the thing about that's the difference between this type of storytelling and soapboxing.
Well, okay, so there's creators who wish to express an ideology through art, and then there is propagandists.
Yes.
And that's what we are getting a lot today. In today's media, we're getting propaganda. Liberal propaganda, which I'm all about liberalism, but liberal propaganda just is weak. And
it doesn't make good storytelling.
No.
Really.
Be smart about it.
Be smart about it. And if you think about it, especially
if you truly want to manipulate people, let me give you some Sith Teachings 101 here. You got to make them like what you have to say.
Yes. Yeah. No, you are 100%.
That sounds really evil. That's why I have a devious smile right now, because it sounds awful.
You and me both.
But that is true,
but
though.
It's the truth.
I think people lost the fine art of winning people over. You have to. What's that saying? You get more with sugar.
Oh, you get more with honey.
There you go. Yeah.
More. You get the flies will be attracted more to honey than anything else.
Yeah, I mean that's what Will and Grace did in the 90s. Remember, that's why gay became so popular in the 90s, because everyone loved that fucking show.
Everyone loved the show.
But now CW comes along and you get so fucking tired. Like, okay, we get it.
We get it. Yeah, exactly. And that is how. And it's sad because I've said this in a ton of the shows that me and you have done, where it's like, writing today is a lost art because most writers are propagandists.
Yeah.
They don't focus on the story. Make me enjoy your story.
I got something to say. It is important. I'm like, listen, no one's arguing the importance of your thoughts. But the way you're doing it is fucking weak sauce.
Yeah. Give me a good story, because at the end of the day, you're still wanting to entertain us.
People forgot about that, Dave.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that again?
Because at the end of the day, as a writer, you have to entertain your audience. That's how you make money. People will come back because
no one wants to read or watch a political manifesto. Okay.
Yes.
That's not fun. That's not entertaining.
No one's going to enjoy that. No one's going to buy your book if all you do is talk about politics and basically not make the story compelling.
Yeah. And that's why I love Hellblazer, because it's one of the best long-running comic book series that delves in. I want to say during its 300 issue run, I mean, it nearly delved into pretty much every major social issue.
Oh yeah,
at some point.
And it did it responsibly and maturely.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing that I always I take away from looking back at Vertigo's history. Hellblazer was the series that took topics that basically people are very scared about to talk about because they didn't want to overstep bounds. And they didn't know, like, back then, a lot of people were like going, well, I don't want to talk about this because, I'm not too sure how to talk about it. But along came writers like Delano and Gaiman and all of them from Vertigo who said, we're going to talk about this
as well.
Alan Moore.
Frank Miller to a degree.
Frank Miller.
He's a little light and superficial at times, but he did have his moments. Yeah.
Toward the end.
Well, definitely now.
But like he's
weak now. But
when you look at it now, they were brave enough to actually say, okay, we're going to write this. We're going to give our spin on it, but we're not going to actually do like what a propagandist do and, finger point at you and say, this is how you need to think. No, you pose the philosophical question in your story so that your audience has the choice to think.
Yeah. I think the goal to properly writing these types of stories is to view it as social commentary and not as politicizing an idea.
Oh, yeah.
Because once you politicize something, it's no longer social commentary, it becomes politics.
Especially,
and that's what a lot of people are doing. And there is a difference between socio-political and politicizing. And I feel like a lot of people don't get that. And I know we're getting way off topic, so we should probably bring it back to this discussion. Yeah. Okay, so David, the art is flawless. There's so many film noir aspects with the art. We talked a lot about it during our last discussion, so I'll keep it brief. The imitation of negative fill with various different color grades, the color schemes devised to, supplant the traditional black and white that you get in film noir. So they use moments of bright greens and reds. There's specifically a moment, I want to say midway through issue 2, where Constantine's running and you get this silhouette of green and red, I want to say, if my memory serves me correct. So, David, final thoughts? I forgot how much of this was used in the Constantine TV series as well. Even parts of the Keanu Reeves film. I believe I had said that during our first discussion too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it blows me away how the TV series actually was a pretty fucking great adaptation. It did a lot of things from the early runs of the comics.
Oh, yeah.
So my score for this is a solid 99%. I want to give it 100 because it's that good, but I'm going to be fair here and make sure my fanboyness is not interfering. So 99%. I'm going to give it 100, says David.
Well, I'm glad you actually, you told my score, because it is, for me, it's 100.
Yeah.
Because this is required, for me, Hellblazer, the first 12 issues of Hellblazer, a 300 issue run, is, for me, if I was teaching comics in school, is required reading.
Teaching lit, anything, not just comic books.
But
yeah, I agree.
This to me is like required reading for anyone who wants to get into comics and wants to up their game when it comes to actually taking a look at comics more than just it's meant for kids.
Yeah, don't just read it. It's called a close reading. Like, analyze
it. And like when you take a look at, this is how you do storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's more than just basically making your character OP. Your main, or nowadays a lot of people say like Mary Sue's, or I think it's called a Kevin or something, where the characters are just great and cannot be stopped.
Yeah.
That leads to lazy storytelling.
Batman.
Pretty much.
I am so smart. I'm the world's greatest detective, and I could do anything.
But when you
except save the city I've been trying to save for 50 years.
For 50 years. That's not. You could do an entire discussion about the feelings of Batman.
And listen, people out there, people of Earth, I do not hate Batman. I always have to say this because there's a lot of, we've faced some Batman.
Yeah, we actually might have some. We might get some hosts jumping out of nowhere and wanting to kill us.
I love Batman. I think he's a great character, but I feel like there's a lot of writers who now are writing titles that just are not needed, and they're not even that great.
They don't.
There's too much.
The
There's too much Batman right now. There's just too much.
Yeah,
there is.
And he's Mickey Mouse. That's it. He's Mickey Mouse of Disney.
He has become the mascot of DC. In fact, there's moments where I feel like they should probably just rename the DC comics
to Batman.
To just Batman.
To just Batman.
All right, let's close out our show. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us and listening. We do have a Patreon exclusive show. It's called the Oblivion Bar, and it's a miniature version of this show. It's a little more casual. We typically get into topics and discussions that we don't have time for on our regular show. So head over to patreon.com/Rayman Digital and pledge just $1. And that will give you access to the Oblivion Bar discussions. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Cheers, wankers. See you never.